In our previous episode, we journeyed to ancient China, witnessing the birth of black powder and its initial, rudimentary weaponization.
Now, as the 14th century dawns upon Europe, the echo of distant thunders signals a new era, as this revolutionary compound finally reaches the West, poised to shatter the foundations of medieval warfare and reshape the continent's military landscape forever. The precise route of gunpowder's journey westward remains debated, but evidence points to its transmission primarily through the vast Mongol Empire. As the Mongols expanded their dominion across Asia into Eastern Europe during the 13th century, their military campaigns likely carried knowledge of incendiary devices and possibly early gunpowder weapons from China, via the Silk Road, to the Islamic world and eventually to Europe. This cultural exchange, often violent, proved to be an unexpected conduit for technological diffusion.
The first credible mentions of gunpowder in Europe appear in the mid-13th century.
The English philosopher and Franciscan friar Roger Bacon, in his 1267 work Epistola de Secretis Operibus Artis et Naturae, et de Nullitate Magii, cryptically described a formula for a compound with explosive properties, hinting at its potential for thunder and lightning. While Bacon's text didn't detail its military application, it confirmed European awareness of the substance's components and potential. By the early 14th century, the first European military applications began to emerge. The German alchemist Berthold Schwarz, a semi-legendary figure, is often credited with inventing gunpowder for military use in Europe around 1313, though historical consensus points to earlier, anonymous experimentation. Regardless of who first harnessed it, these early alchemists and military engineers were desperately experimenting with saltpeter, charcoal, and sulfur, attempting to refine the volatile black powder into a controllable force for projectile weapons. The initial European reaction to gunpowder was a mixture of awe, skepticism, and fear. Many perceived its destructive power as unnatural, even demonic. Early experiments were often dangerous, with crude cannons prone to bursting, leading to high casualties among their operators. This inherent risk, coupled with the slow, laborious process of manufacturing and loading, meant that gunpowder weapons were not immediately embraced as a superior alternative to established siege engines like trebuchets and mangonels. Despite the dangers, the potential was undeniable, leading to the development of the earliest European gunpowder weapons, the pot de fer, or iron pot, and early Bombards. These were rudimentary, vase-shaped or bottle-necked cannons, often made of wrought iron staves bound with hoops or cast bronze, designed to fire large, arrow-like bolts or stone shot. They were heavy, immobile, and required significant effort to load, but their deafening roar and ability to hurl projectiles with unprecedented force marked a terrifying departure from traditional weaponry. The first widely documented military use of cannons in Europe occurred during the 100 Years' War. At the Battle of Crécy in 1346, the English army of King Edward III reportedly deployed 3 primitive ribautquins or small bombards. While their impact on the battle's outcome was likely more psychological than physically decisive, startling the French cavalry with noise and smoke, their mere presence on such a significant battlefield signaled a new chapter in military history. They were a nascent threat, a harbinger of things to come.
Initially, these early cannons were often used in conjunction with traditional siege weaponry and alongside formidable forces like the English longbowmen. While the longbowmen delivered a continuous hail of deadly arrows, the cannons provided intermittent, thunderous blows. However, their slow rate of fire, cumbersome nature, and limited accuracy meant they were far from the dominant force. They were an auxiliary weapon, yet one that forced commanders to consider new tactics and defenses. The French, initially on the receiving end of these new weapons, quickly recognized their potential. By the mid-14th century, French royal ordinances were issued for the production of artillery. King John II of France, and later Charles V, heavily invested in artillery, recognizing its strategic importance. French engineers began to refine cannon designs, experimenting with larger calibers and more robust constructions, slowly shifting from crude. The production of these early cannons presented significant metallurgical challenges. Wrought iron cannons, made by welding together iron staves and reinforcing them with hoops, were prone to cracking and catastrophic failure under pressure.
Cast bronze cannons, though more reliable, were incredibly expensive due to the cost of copper and tin and the specialized casting techniques required. This constant struggle between strength, cost, and reliability spurred rapid innovation in metalworking throughout the 14th and 15th centuries. As the 14th century progressed into the 15th, cannon design underwent rapid transformation. Early, short-barreled bombards evolved into longer, more efficient culverins and basilisks, capable of firing heavier stone or iron shot with greater accuracy and range. The development of trunnions, protruding cylindrical pivots on the cannon barrel, allowed for easier elevation and depression, enabling them to be mounted on mobile wheeled carriages. This innovation drastically improved their tactical flexibility and speed of deployment on the battlefield. The Hundred Years' War, lasting from 1337 to 1453, became a crucible for artillery development. While Crécy saw their hesitant introduction, subsequent sieges demonstrated their increasing effectiveness. For instance, during the Siege of Calais in 1347, English cannons, though still primitive, contributed to the prolonged blockade. By the war's end, particularly under King Charles VII of France, French artillery became a formidable force, playing a crucial role in dismantling English strongholds and ultimately securing French victory, as seen at the Battle of Castillon in 1453. Italian city-states, with their vibrant commercial economies and constant internecine warfare, were also at the forefront of artillery innovation. Florence, Venice, and Milan invested heavily in casting superior bronze cannons, often employing master metallurgists and engineers. The Italian Renaissance, with its emphasis on engineering and scientific inquiry, directly fueled advancements in gunpowder manufacturing, ballistics, and cannon design, making Italian artillery highly sought after across Europe. In the Holy Roman Empire, particularly in regions like Bohemia and the German states, artillery also saw significant development. The Hussite Wars, 1419 to 1434, in Bohemia famously showcased the innovative use of Wagenburg, Wagenfort, tactics, complemented by light, mobile cannons called Haufnis. German cities like Nuremberg and Augsburg became renowned centers for cannon casting, producing high-quality bronze and iron pieces for various European powers, contributing to the widespread proliferation of gunpowder weapons. Further east, the Ottoman Empire rapidly embraced and excelled in artillery technology. By the mid-15th century, they commanded some of the largest and most destructive siege guns in the world. Their engineers, often employing European renegades like the Hungarian Master Urban, cast colossal bombards. These monstrous cannons, exemplified by the Dardanelles gun, were capable of firing immense stone balls, becoming a defining feature of Ottoman military might and striking terror into their adversaries. Before the advent of gunpowder artillery, medieval siege warfare was a protracted and often desperate affair. Castles, designed to withstand sustained assaults, could hold out for months, even years. Sieges relied heavily on starvation, disease, sapping, scaling ladders, and massive, costly siege engines like trebuchets that hurled stones, but rarely shattered thick stone walls. The defender held a significant advantage, making direct assaults a last resort. The arrival of early cannons fundamentally altered this equation. Initially, their impact was more psychological, but as metallurgy improved and bore sizes increased, they began to punch through stone defenses with unprecedented force. The deafening roar, the clouds of smoke, and the sheer destructive power of a bombard hurling a stone ball the size of a man's head shattered not only masonry but also the morale of the defenders, who had little defense against such a relentless battering. By the mid-15th century, the age of artillery had truly begun. Castles, which had defined medieval power and defense for centuries, were suddenly rendered vulnerable. A well-equipped besieging army with powerful cannons could now reduce even the most formidable fortresses to rubble in a matter of days or weeks, rather than months or years. This rapid shift in military technology spelled the end for the traditional, high-walled, thin-walled castle, forcing a radical re-evaluation of defensive architecture across Europe. Perhaps the most iconic example of artillery's transformative power came with the fall of Constantinople in 1453. Sultan Mehmed II's Ottoman forces deployed an immense array of artillery, including the legendary Basilica cannon, cast by Urban, which was reportedly 27 feet long and could fire 1,200-pound stone balls. These colossal guns systematically battered the ancient, triple-layered Theodosian walls, which had withstood countless sieges for over a millennium, until breaches were finally made, paving the way for the city's capture. Beyond the physical destruction, the psychological impact of cannon fire was immense. The sheer noise, the concussion, the sight of massive stone walls disintegrating, and the inability to effectively counter the bombardment created a sense of helplessness among defenders. This psychological warfare, combined with the physical breaches, often led to quicker surrenders, saving besiegers from the heavy casualties of prolonged assaults.
In response to this new threat, European military engineers and architects began to innovate. The traditional high, thin walls of medieval castles were utterly inadequate against cannon fire. A new era of artillery fortifications dawned, exemplified by the early forms of the Tres Italien, or Star Fort. These new designs featured lower, thicker walls, often sloped to deflect cannonballs, with earth-filled ramparts and strategically placed bastions to provide interlocking fields of fire. These new fortifications prioritized resistance over height. Walls were constructed from robust masonry backed by massive amounts of earth, absorbing the shock of cannonballs rather than simply presenting a target. Furthermore, the development of glassy, sloped earthworks extending outwards from the main wall removed cover for attacking artillery and exposed besiegers to defensive fire, making approaches more hazardous. The geometric precision of these designs marked a profound shift in defensive military engineering. However, fielding an effective artillery train was incredibly costly and logistically complex. Cannons were expensive to cast, required vast quantities of saltpeter and other materials for powder, and demanded specialized teams of artillerists and engineers. Transporting these massive weapons across medieval terrain was a Herculean task, often requiring hundreds of horses and men. This immense logistical burden meant that only the wealthiest monarchs and states could truly leverage the full potential of gunpowder artillery. The strategic implications of gunpowder artillery were profound. Siege warfare, once a slow war of attrition, now transformed into a more dynamic and often decisive assault. The ability to rapidly breach fortifications meant that campaigns could be shorter and more focused. This shifted military doctrine from prolonged blockades and skirmishes to concentrated, devastating bombardments aimed at achieving swift victory, fundamentally altering the pace and nature of European warfare. The expense and expertise required for artillery had a significant centralizing effect on political power. Feudal lords, who once commanded formidable power from their virtually impregnable castles, found their independent strongholds easily vulnerable to royal or princely artillery. This weakened their autonomy and strengthened the hand of kings and emerging nation-states, who alone possessed the resources to maintain large, professional artillery corps. The age of the independent warlord began to wane. This centralization of power led directly to the decline of feudalism and the rise of more centralized, professional standing armies. Kings began to recruit and train dedicated artillery corps, complete with specialized engineers, gunners, and support staff. These professional forces, loyal to the crown, replaced the reliance on feudal levies and independent knights, laying the groundwork for the modern state's military structure. The impact of cannons was not confined to land warfare. By the late 15th century, shipwrights began to adapt cannon technology for naval vessels. Early naval cannons, often mounted on the main deck, initially supplemented traditional ramming and boarding tactics. However, the development of gun ports along the ship's broadside eventually allowed for devastating broadsides, transforming naval combat and laying the foundation for the age of sail and naval dominance by European powers like Portugal, Spain, and England. The spread of gunpowder technology and the subsequent development of cannons and bombards marked a definitive end to the High Middle Ages. It ushered in a new era where technology, logistics, and centralized power became paramount. The clash of cannon fire against ancient stone walls was more than just a battle, it was the sound of an old world giving way to a new, forging the path for the military and political landscape of the early modern period. From their crude beginnings, these early cannons transformed warfare, rendered ancient defenses obsolete, and reshaped the very fabric of European power. But as the age of massive siege engines begins to mature, the focus of innovation will inevitably shrink.
Join us next time as we explore the miniaturization of this destructive power and the rise of personal firearms, forever changing the individual soldier's role on the battlefield.